With that, Becky is going to introduce our speaker, Leo Lewis, today, and she just introduced Obi so that we know who's here today, and we're looking forward to Leo's talk. Thanks, Becky.
Well, I know some of you have said Becky knows everybody. I'm working on it because I really don't. But I happened to meet Leo Lewis through a friend at the Perkins across the freeway and found out that he was doing his annual fundraiser, golf tournament, and award ceremony. So I thought, wow, that sounds like a cool thing. Maybe I could do that. And I was especially excited because the award dinner was on Sunday, and I thought, hey, that's a non-work day. Well, then the whole tournament was on a Monday. But it was in my town. Anyway, Leo is going to be talking today, and probably a lot of you know Leo from his Minnesota Vikings day, and just have those visions of how he would run, and it was just phenomenal. And he comes from actually a football family. His father was actually a college Hall of Famer in football and Canadian Football Hall of Fame. Okay, enough on the sports stuff, right? Anyway, we're just thrilled to have Leo here in addition to playing football. Wasn't it 12 years? For the Vikings and the Cleveland Browns. We'll just ignore the Browns. Well, maybe we have to ignore the Vikings depending on the weekend. If you can help us understand what's going on. He also worked for the Vikings. And then in 1999, he started his foundation. It's the Lewis Sports Foundation. It's a 50c3, nonprofit that we're all familiar with. And it focuses on providing youth with tools to develop life skills through education and physical activity. And by promoting physical activity and sports participation, they've been able to improve the abilities of people to cope with daily challenges of life. So we're going to have Leo tell us a little bit more about his foundation.
Thank you, Becky. She is correct. I tell you what, Obi and I meet at the Perkins across the way every Monday, and we digest the weekend, the games, the week that occurred before we met again, and it's always good to see Becky there because she's always talking, she's always hustling. So I really thank you, Becky, for inviting me. It's a really good asset to this talk right now. President Debbie Belfry, Karen Arazi, and certainly Laura for helping me with this PowerPoint. I'll get to it in a minute, but as we move into fall and the holiday season, I'm always reminded just how blessed we are to live in this country. We can debate about where it's going forward, and certainly make sure that we also have the opportunity to make it possible for us to have a conversation about those topics. But I'm certainly grateful for the invitation. It allows me to introduce myself and expound on some of the family Minnesota legacy in sport. And each year I use this time of the year to kind of reflect on family, which is one institution that I can count on the most. First, I want to talk about what I'm doing now. The fact that I'm 1 year removed from being a Medicare baby. I just am so proud of this government assistance. For those of you who are past your prime, we earned this. We earned the right to be in this position. But mostly I want to give you some historical sports background on my family and how it really shaped my career in sports and education. I'll show some photos here in a minute that help you see how the participation in sport and why Minnesota is probably the best place for me to live this life. And then lastly, I'll talk about my efforts in community service that has been a fundamental part of my career paths. And I call these career paths parallel tracks, which is really a reflection on my sporting and education career. So currently I teach a course at the University of Minnesota, a sport management course that really talks about sport culture, how we are all socialized in sport at various avenues, the micro elements of sport when we talk about race, ethnicity, gender, disability, and the macro elements, the the economic effects that are involved in sport, the political and governmental policy effects that are influential to the institutions that share sport. Sport is a influential social practice in our culture. You know, the author Ernest Hemingway said there are only 3 sports in the world: bullfighting, mountain climbing, and motor car racing. The rest are only games. His take during a time when the country, fought 2 world wars and the Korean conflict is vastly different than now, where in this postmodern era, there's corporate influence in all of our sports and physical activities. And they are so influential in shaping our experiences as a participant or as a spectator. I own a sport and education consulting business as well for professionals and students, and namely as a mental performance consultant, as I help athletes and non-athletes to develop more efficient ways to be successful. And for 23 years, I've helped run the Lewis Sports Foundation. As mentioned before, it's a nonprofit organization that provides resources and funding for basically underserved organizations and individuals. And then lastly, I'm writing a biography on my family, this historic account on our involvement, which really kind of focuses on my father, Leo Lewis Jr., and his sports career. It will eventually support my autobiography that will kind of be the second volume of this journey. So I want to take us through this historical, pictorial essay about my family involvement. I see Laura's got the first slide up here, which is a slide of my grandfather, Leo Lewis, who's in the backfield behind the quarterback, as we kind of deem that position. He grew up in Des Moines. Actually, my dad was born in Des Moines, Iowa, one of only 11 kids who was born outside of Minnesota. The other 11 were born in St. Paul, Minnesota. So my dad grew up, though, in St. Paul. And but first, his father was a exercise and sport enthusiast. This is a picture in 1916 where my grandfather is part of a barnstorming team of fellows who went across Iowa and the other states to play football and other sports. Certainly they did it on their own because of Jim Crow laws. They weren't allowed to do other things in public spaces. So they created their own sports, as was the take of the day back in the teens and 20s, 100 years ago, where even historically black colleges started to create their own sports teams and venues. My grandfather loved golf. Here's a picture with several fellows here in St. Paul. He was actually part of what we call the Bronze Tournament that was started in the early 30s and is still evident in the Twin Cities tournament, mainly among African American golfers. It's now played at Hiawatha Golf Course in Minneapolis. But he's here with his brother, Homer. Homer eventually stayed in Des Moines and raised his family. And he also is with a gentleman right here. It's in the back. His name is Dwight Reed. Dwight Reed was a football in at the University of Minnesota during their 2 national championship teams in the 1933 and 34. And Dwight Reed would ultimately become very instrumental in the Lewis family, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Dad went to Old Marshall High School in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's off of Holly Avenue in St. Paul. Grew up on the block of Carroll Avenue, the 700 block of Carroll Avenue in the Rondo neighborhood. Why he wore number 62, I'm not sure. I think they just gave you a number because it really didn't relate to any of the things they do. Nowadays, 62 is usually a number relegated to the line, but my dad was a running back, and back then, you never know. I'm understanding that I need to find that information, though. Dad went to a historically black college, Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri, which at the time was the closest historically black college for individuals, African Americans in the Twin Cities. He was a two-time All-American. That's why he's in the College Football Hall of Fame. At one time led the nation in total yards gained by a collegian. And Dad was brought there by Dwight Reed, who left St. Paul. Dwight actually went to Washington High School, which is a little bit north, in northern St. Paul. But he didn't get any jobs in the National Football League because at that time, between 1933 and 1946, there was this color barrier in the National Football League. And so African Americans couldn't play in the National Football League. Actually, what we have here is this guy right here named Ray Kemp, who was ideally the last African American player to play before the color barrier in 1933. Played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So he was one of two African Americans who played in the NFL before they enacted the color barrier. Certainly it went until the 1946, 1947. So my dad was mentored by not only someone he grew up with in St. Paul, but a stalwart of the National Football League in the 30s, who eventually was the athletic director at Lincoln University as well. So we have this iconic picture here, which really kind of encapsulates everything about my dad, who, although he was drafted in the National Football League by the old Baltimore Colts, he made more money in Canada. And when you talk about $1,000 more back then, that was worth going somewhere else. As did a number of Americans, because of the fact that at this time in the early 50s, you didn't know whether you were going to get called up for the Korean conflict, even after the Korean conflict, or that you had to serve your country. Oftentimes individuals, and I'm not sure whether you know this or not, for those of you who are older than I am, you probably do. When you left high school, you didn't necessarily consider college. You either worked or you went to the military. However, we'll go back, he's wearing his ROTC uniform, and he's always ready, just like lunch meat. So it's interesting. Dad and Bud Grant took a similar trek to professional football. And they were both on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers team in 1955. You see Bud Grant right here, Dad, right, my father. We have this gentleman right here, Stav Kanakis. I don't know if any of you remember him, but he was an Edina coach for over 30 years, is in the Minnesota Coaches Hall of Fame, but took Edina to a number of high school state championships. And then we have a gentleman right here named Tom Casey, who was one of the first African Americans to play in the Canadian Football League, and eventually became a physician in Canada. So Dad won a lot of awards. He and Bud was the coach. Bud had a great career before he came to Minnesota. Won 4 championships in Canada out of 6. Dad just so happens in professional sports, this is what you get when you become the most valuable player on your team. A trophy and a steer. I remember a lot of packs of meat in our refrigerator. Dad was coached by Bud up in Winnipeg for 10 years, and had a stellar career. Canadian Football Hall of Famer. Certainly, Dad passed away in 2013, and eventually I would follow suit. My mother was also an athlete. She was a physical education teacher and played basketball and softball, was a homecoming queen in high school, was a gym teacher. This is a familiar pose. I remember as a kid so often. And telling me, you don't know everything. But Mom was certainly a pillar. Then out of that union emerged a little Tyke, the oldest of their sons, Leo III, and would be a high school quarterback and won the all-state in Missouri, won the state championship, went to the University of Missouri, and played 4 years, and also worked in the coaching staff as well. Played in the Calgary Stampeders my first year as a professional, and then eventually was a Minnesota Viking. Some of you, this is I know Obi would appreciate this, is a practice in Mankato. They don't no longer practice in Mankato much, but certainly those days were really fruitful as well as memorable. One of my favorite photos of Bud and my dad and me after a practice in Eden Prairie, and one that I'll never forget in terms of how it encapsulates the story about us. And these are some photos of my foundation where we mentor kids in various locations and activities, and certainly we'll follow up with a picture of my celebrity golf event, which is 20 years in the making. So those are some of the photos, and certainly at the end we talk about some of the research that I've done on athletes, particularly professional athletes. So well, hopefully if we have time I'll show a video about our foundation, but I want to go forward in terms of understanding the parallel tracks about education and sport that have unfolded throughout my professional career. I grew up in Columbia, Missouri, and the first track started because I went to school to play sports. And although I was a good player, I wasn't drafted. I think, though, throughout my professional career, in the first 3 years, I was cut 4 times. So I had to find out a plan B. I had to figure out what was my plan B. And I went to graduate school, obviously, and started at the University of Missouri, and then went to the University of Tennessee. And what emerged at that time was this sub-discipline called sports psychology. And it really got me interested. It really kind of made things fit for me to pursue graduate work. And I finished my graduate degree in University of Tennessee. My wife was a veterinary medicine resident at the time. And I decided in the off seasons to just go ahead and get my master's degree in education. And I really wanted to be an athletic director and a principal. That quickly dashed because I continued to play football, and what emerged was a more expanded experience. When I finally moved up here full time, I decided to continue my academic career. I wanted to really kind of expound on the African American experience in pro and college sports, particularly on campuses where they at one time were not allowed. And at the same time, I was feeling this notion and experience that meant, I wasn't going to be an athlete for long. So there was a sub-discipline focus on career transition for athletes, where you really focus on those ideas about what it means to leave a profession that you love, that you're focused on, that you spend a lot of time on, but you're only 30 years old. And so those notions of that experience are very similar to what some of us have experienced right now, in that, we can forget working every day. Let's try a new trek in life. So that was one of the things that helped spur me on to get an additional role with the Minnesota Vikings. So I was in the Vikings front office for 13 more years as their player development director, and helped mentor a lot of the athletes at the time throughout the 90s to help their transition out of football. I started my journey in community service as a Viking player. I was doing the hospital visits, the school visits, the visits to social service agencies, and but I wanted to really do work in the community that was really more closely tied to my personal interests. It wasn't until 1999 that I founded the Lewis Sports Foundation and really focused on some of those things that I was doing every day, focusing on healthy living, stress the importance of an active lifestyle, creating a vision where we as an organization could support the active lives of youth and families. And to be active every day gives us a greater opportunity for a healthy heart, mind, and spirit for life. So we believe supporting physical activities as special experiences, and it helps us learn certain principles that we can use in life outside of sport, where we learn persistence, dedication, making a commitment to a team or to ourselves, how to be a good teammate, what it means to have good relationships in our lives. And also, it does mean that we can challenge our mind and body in different ways, such as embracing the performance, visual, and creative arts, understanding how to improve your communication and math skills. And lastly, we're there to help parents and give them more effective tools and resources to help raise their children in today's environment. So to end here, I'd like to kind of tell you a little bit about the Lewis Sports Foundation and show a brief video. Hopefully it works. But, I started my interest in serving the community by giving free sports camps and having certain aspects of youth development that we could use sport to help emulate. And we do things like introduce lacrosse, a new sport, to inner city kids. We had about 100 of them this year, and worked with St. Paul Parks and Recreation to do that. We created a participatory cross skills challenge event where we challenge, just like CrossFit, we challenge kids to, in a physical activity format, to experience different types of sports skills. We have a program focus called Life Skills Through Sports, where we value education success, how you can make good decisions in life. Financial literacy is one of the focus that we have. And certainly be an activist of self, to really lobby for yourself and make good decisions and be proactive in life. We hosted a military youth sports fitness experience for youth of deployed National Guard soldiers, and worked with the Yellow Ribbon organization to be effective in that respect. And we have created an academic coach program, something which is really what I'm excited about, and implementing it in 4 high schools today. We have 2 in St. Paul, 1 in Woodbury, and 1 in Osseo. We've supported the For Us Caddy program that introduces youth to the game of golf. And lastly, we do serve as a fiduciary. We give out about $10,000 worth of equipment and resources to youth and families. So it looks like that is my broad story, but I do want you to understand it just didn't start with me. Just like I'm Leo Lewis III, to neglect what was before me or what came before me would be a travesty. But at the same time, it's an honor to talk to you about my family and my background, how sport has been a meaningful social practice in our family life, and how we have transformed it to be a learning tool for not only our upbringing, but for others. So thank you so much, Becky. I really appreciate it. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I am so blessed to be here, and thank you for being responsible listeners. Thank you very much.
Do you want to see the video first? And then we'll have
Yeah, she can sing. Yeah,
We'll watch the video and then do
Yeah.
questions.
if possible. Okay, no problem. I started the Lewis Sports Foundation after years of doing clinics and camps for youth, and what emerged was this whole program called Life Skills Through Sports. The foundation used sport and physical activity to help address fundamental life development issues that young people are confronted with each day. We give financial support and sports coaching to underserved communities. More importantly, we believe that life development topics such as making a commitment, making good life decisions, and doing one's best are fundamental to being a good citizen and giving back to our community.
Sports Foundation fundraiser dinner. Yes, it is. Let's have some fun tonight.
The Lewis Sports Foundation has a 2-day fundraising event to raise funds for our programs. On the first day, we have our annual awards where we honor local practitioners who have gone well above what is expected of them. And also, we look at the legacy that some of our practitioners have throughout their careers. The second day, I invite several of my friends and teammates to play in my annual golf event. For over 20 years, we have used this celebrity event as our major fundraiser that helps us reach more young people and be more impactful in the community.
We're having fun and we're trying to help Mr. Leo Lewis out, who is probably one of the pillars of the earth here. It's a great cause, and he do a lot of good things for a lot of kids.
I just appreciate his heart. You know, him and his wife, man, they come together. They always doing wonderful things for people.
It's because of guys like Leo from back then, getting a young guy like me involved, getting out, volunteering, getting out, helping the community, just giving back.
Leo, although he was a tremendous athlete and a leader in our community, also believed in the power of education and what a young man or young lady can do through mentorship and being involved in the community.
You got to get help a whole lot of youth, you know, with his foundations.
He asked me to do something, I'm going to try to do my best to do it.
So when you get a chance to give back, it's a beautiful thing when you do.
So we're asking everyone to join us to support the Lewis Sports Foundation so we can make a greater impact in the Twin Cities community.
I'll invite Leo back up to answer some questions. We have time for that. And on your tables, you'll also notice there's a flyer about the Leo Lewis Foundation. So please pick those up and take them and pass them on. Questions? Terry?
Yeah, it's more of a comment that I'd like you to address. But when I was a young man in the South, in a town that was owned by a company, if you wanted to play in sports, you had the opportunity. You might have to buy a set of cleats, and perhaps it was unique with the company, but everything else was supplied for you so that anybody that wanted to could get involved. I know with my grandkids today, it takes a certain income level for them to participate. And personally, what can we do about that?
Right. Well, I think organizations, nonprofits really help buffer that discrepancy. But, you know, at one time, school districts supported sports in a way that it didn't affect their budget lines, and everything was complimentary, you know, and I think you know, public schools now really do stress participation, but certainly the budget constraints really has, created hurdles for individuals who may not be able to support it or afford it. Now, I would say this, that corporate influence has a lot to do with it. Social media has something to do with the fact that kids want to aspire to be like the greatest athletes in our time, but don't want to do the work to get there. But I think there is still capable opportunities for kids if they really want to play, and we do serve some of those families as well to be able to. And granted, some organizations do have scholarship opportunities for kids as well. But you're right. I think when we grew up, your sporting opportunities were in school, and they were supported by the schools only. Very rarely did you have privatization of sports where you had to go and pay for things in order to participate. Parks and Recreation is another governmental entity that provides public opportunities and low-cost opportunities as well. Hope I answered the question. Yes?
Yeah, I just sort of comment too is that when I see a guy like Adam Tila, I think back to people like you or Scott Randall who got great distinctions. Is in the Ring of Honor there at the stadium.
Not drafted too. John Randall was.
I know, I was saying we're undrafted. I'm always thinking there should be some spot in the Ring of Honor for the undrafted overachiever that's kept us contributed so much. And maybe to the life, just like we have the NFL Man of the Year thing, and keep nominating somebody like you who's done so much, not only community service during your tenure with the Vikings, but afterwards. Just have a little spot there that honored people in those categories, because they've given us and our community so much benefit. Yeah, you're probably too modest.
Well, I don't do it for the accolades. I had my accolades in the arena, you know. So I think you know, the main purpose for me has always been to reflect on my experiences and how I want every other kid to be able to have those opportunities. And I think one of the things is that, you know, a lot of kids lose their social support. I mean, you know, you can see our social agents, our parents, our peers, and certainly, you know, that family milieu that can be extended to friends and extended family. You know, I mean, that's being kind of disrupted to where, you know, it's very much so tougher for kids to experience those athletic accolades as much as I did. It's not to say that I wasn't fortunate. There's no doubt. I remember, if you guys remember Mike Glenn, who was the general manager for the Vikings in the 80s. After I was cut the last time, I came in and he looked at my contract, and it was $27,000, you know. And he said, "Man, we're paying you too much." I said right there and then, this is a business, you know. And even back then, it was a business, and you know, players weren't making as much at all comparatively to the average worker, where now it's astronomically much more. Yes, Becky.
You know, one of the awards that you gave, I thought was really interesting, and maybe you could talk a little bit about it. The badminton team, the Hmong girls in St. Paul, and I thought, oh, I've never heard about this, and they're winning and winning.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, when we look at badminton, it's not one of our popular sports, but it's very popular in the east side of St. Paul. And, you know, Johnson High School has had a reigning girls badminton team. I think they've won 8 out of the last 10 state championships. And we wanted to recognize them primarily because they're not seen as being on the same level as a football team. If Johnson's football team won the state championship, you bet everyone would know about it, you know. But I think that's kind of one of our strategies, is to honor those individuals who do just as much work but don't get as much credit or don't get as noticed. And it really is about the student athletes. The coach that's been there is a math teacher as well. And he deserves as much recognition as the other sports coaches. All right. Thank you so much for allowing me to come and be there. Okay.
So, and because I was there, so I think people probably don't know about how you are recognizing, like, the math teacher coach.
Yes.
And how you're working with people at different levels and trying to support them and get them, you know, feeling rewarded for what they're doing. And I'm sure they're not doing it for the rewards, but I just thought it was really neat that there were things that I'd never heard of, and probably nobody else here has.
Yeah. Well, I would just piggyback on that, and then we can finish. Another award was to Al Nunes, who is a former University of Minnesota basketball player in the 60s. Who since then has been doing great work in the community. He ended up taking a job with Jostens and made sure Jostens recognize coaches at the youth and high school level, and not just make it a corporate entity where you're working with the NCAA and the Big Ten. And then also he was a coach, a high school coach, you know, and worked in schools, and now is still mentoring. Close to 80 years old, still mentoring at Hopkins School District in their high school. And then the last one was a woman, Meredith Lane, who's an African-American woman who had a daughter that wanted to play ice hockey and felt that there wasn't enough resources for her to support her daughter, but then also created an avenue where there were interested ethnic groups that wanted to try ice hockey. So she created her own organization to really make it known and make sure that kids who were underserved got an opportunity to get ice time just as much as anyone else would, because it's very expensive, as you well know. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.